John's tires crunched over the gravel driveway as he pulled up to the Ravenwood Hotel, its crumbling facade barely visible in the dim glow of flickering streetlights. The building loomed against the night sky, its windows like hollow eyes watching his approach. The journey had been long, and exhaustion clung to him like a second skin. He hadn't planned to stop here, but the sign's promise of unbeatable rates had been too tempting to ignore, especially for a room as cheap as $404. The lobby was a time capsule of neglect, the air thick with the scent of mildew, and something faintly metallic. A single flickering bulb cast long shadows across the peeling wallpaper. Behind the desk sat Miss Graves, her gaunt face framed by wiry grey hair. Her eyes, cold and unblinking, tracked his every move as he approached. "Room for one night," John said, sliding his ID across the counter. Miss Graves' fingers, bony and yellowed, tapped the keys of an ancient typewriter with deliberate slowness. "Room 404, she muttered, her voice like dry leaves scraping pavement. She slid the key toward him, her nails chipped and cracked. "Check-out is at noon. No extensions." John frowned. "That's it. No welcome packet, no breakfast voucher." Her lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You won't want to stay longer than that." Her gaze flickered to the staircase behind him, and for a moment, he thought he saw fear in her eyes. John hesitated, then pocketed the key. "What's wrong with the room?" Miss Graves' expression closed like a door slamming shut. "It has a history, that's all." She turned away, effectively dismissing him. As John climbed the creaking stairs, the weight of her words settled over him. The hallway stretched endlessly, the numbers on the doors fading with age. When he finally reached room 404, the door groaned open to reveal a space frozen in time. Yellowed wallpaper, a sagging bed, and a mirror so dusty it was nearly opaque. The air was stale, but beneath it, something else lingered, the faint, coppery tang of blood. He dropped his bag onto the bed, the springs protesting loudly. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing, rattling the windowpane. John tried to ignore the creeping sense of unease. After all, it was just one night. What could possibly go wrong? But as he locked the door behind him, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. Somewhere, in the silence of the Ravenwood Hotel, something was waiting. John stirred from a fitful sleep, his body heavy with exhaustion. The Ravenwood Hotel creaked around him, its ancient bones groaning under the weight of the storm outside. Then, he heard it, soft, insistent whispers, threading through the walls like tendrils of smoke. They seemed to coil around his ears, murmuring in a language he couldn't understand but felt in his bones. He sat up, heart pounding, and that's when the scratching started. A slow, deliberate scrape against the wallpaper, as if something, or someone, was dragging fingernails across the surface from the other side. The room was ice cold, his breath frosting in the air. He fumbled for the lamp, but the bulb flickered weakly, casting jagged shadows that writhed like living things. His eyes darted to the door, where a slip of paper had appeared beneath it, though he was certain no one had approached. The note was written in shaky, almost desperate handwriting. "Ever leave while you can." The words sent a shudder down his spine, not just from their ominous warning, but because the script looked hauntingly familiar. It tugged at a memory he couldn't quite grasp, like a name on the tip of his tongue. He crumpled the note, tossing it onto the nightstand, but the whispers only grew louder, now forming a single word, repeated in a chorus of ghostly voices. "Go, go, go, dot." The scratching became frantic, closer, as if whatever was on the other side of the wall was desperate to break through. John pressed his palms to his ears, but the sound seeped into his skull. That's when he saw it, a faint, fleeting movement in the corner of his eye. The mirror. For just a second, the reflection wasn't his own. A gaunt face, hollow-eyed and silent, stared back at him before vanishing like smoke. The room plunged into silence. The whispering stopped, the scratching ceased. But the air was thick with the unshakable certainty that he was no longer alone. The musty air of room 404 clung to John's throat as he rummaged through the nightstand drawer, his fingers brushing against something unexpected. A small, leather-bound diary, its pages yellowed with age. The cover was embossed with the initials EEH, and a shiver ran down his spine as he flipped it open. The first entry was dated 3 years prior, the handwriting neat but tinged with an undercurrent of unease. Arrived at Ravenwood. The receptionist, Ms. Graves, seemed insistent I take another room, but the price for 404 was too good to pass up. Strange though. I could have sworn I heard whispering in the walls. As John read on, Emily's tone shifted. Her words grew frantic. "There's something here, a presence. It watches me from the corners, always just out of sight. I call it the Watcher. Last night I woke to its breath on my neck, cold, scentless. It's getting bolder." The entries became disjointed, scribbled in haste. "The mirror. It moves when I'm not looking. The Watcher is in the reflection. It's not human, it's hungry." The final entry sent a chill through him. "It won't let me leave. The door won't open. Miss Graves won't answer my calls. I think, oh God, it's inside the walls." John slammed the diary shut, his pulse roaring in his ears. The scratching from the walls seemed to grow louder, rhythmic, like fingers dragging across plaster. A draft hissed through the room, though the window was sealed shut. Then, a sound, a faint, rasping whisper, barely audible, of Emily, brought his breath fogged in the sudden cold. The diary had been left for him to find. But by whom, and why? The watcher was no longer just a shadow in Emily's words, it was here, and it knew his name. John rubbed his weary eyes, convinced the exhaustion of his journey was playing tricks on him. But as he turned away from the bathroom sink, something in the mirror flickered. A movement just beyond his reflection. His breath hitched as he slowly turned back, his heart pounding. There, for just a fraction of a second, stood a gaunt woman with sunken cheeks and hollow, lifeless eyes. She was gone before he could even blink, leaving only his own pale face staring back in horror. A sudden chill gripped the room, the air so cold his breath formed visible clouds. The whispers he'd heard earlier now swelled into a chorus, threading through the walls like unseen fingers. They chanted a name, Emily, 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 each repetition louder, more insistent. John stumbled back, his shoulder hitting the doorframe. The mirror fogged over, and for a terrifying moment, he thought her face might reappear. Then, the whispers stopped. The silence was worse. His pulse roared in his ears as he reached out, wiping the condensation from the glass. The reflection was his own again, but beneath his fingers the surface felt unnaturally warm. He yanked his hand back as if burned. That's when he noticed the writing. Faint, jagged letters scratched into the fogged mirror, as though etched by unseen nails, "You shouldn't have stayed." The temperature plummeted further. The lights flickered, and in the brief flashes of darkness, he swore he saw her, Emily, standing just behind him, her skeletal fingers reaching for his throat. John jolted awake, his heartbeat hammering in his ears. The room was icy, his breath visible in the air despite the humid summer night outside. The whispers had returned, no longer faint murmurs but urgent, desperate pleas. He fumbled for the lamp, the weak yellow light revealing something new. A slip of paper on the floor, barely visible beneath the door. His hands shook as he picked it up. 2 words in shaky, smeared ink: "Bressers, help me." The air grew heavier, thick with the scent of mildew and something metallic. The scratching in the walls escalated into frenzied scraping, like fingernails clawing at wood. Then, in the dim light, he saw her. A woman, no, the ghost of a woman, stood at the foot of his bed. Her face was gaunt, her sunken eyes pools of endless sorrow. But what made his blood freeze was her mouth, crudely sewn shut with thick black thread. She raised a trembling hand, her finger outstretched toward the far wall. As John followed her gesture, crimson letters began to seep through the peeling wallpaper, fresh and glistening. "Ah, he watches. He waits." The words dripped down the wall like tears, pooling on the floorboards. The whispers swelled into a chorus, Emily's name echoing from every corner of the room. The temperature plummeted further. Frost spider-webbed across the mirror, and in its reflection, John saw him, a towering shadow with hollow eyes lurking just behind him. The Watcher. Emily's lips strained against the threads, her silent scream reverberating in his skull. She pointed again, this time to the floor beneath the bed. The message was clear. If John wanted to uncover the truth, if he wanted to survive, he had to look deeper. The letter sat on the counter, its plain white envelope out of place among the glossy brochures and polished wood of the hotel's front desk. Emma's fingers trembled as she picked it up, the paper unnaturally cold to the touch. The address was handwritten in a spidery script, her name, Emma Carter, barely legible. But what chilled her more was the room number scrawled in the corner, 44. She knew that room. Everyone at the Blackwood Hotel did. It had been locked for as long as she'd worked there, rumors swirling about its previous occupants. Some said it was quarantined after a gruesome illness, others whispered about a tragedy too dark to speak of aloud. Emma had never believed the stories, until now. The envelope crinkled as she pried it open, her breath hitching at the single slip of paper inside. In the same jagged handwriting, 4 words glared up: "Aha, I know what you did." The words sent a jolt through her, her stomach twisting into knots. The memory came unbidden. The accident last winter, the icy road, the figure stumbling into her headlights. She'd driven away, told no one. But someone knew. The lobby felt suffocating suddenly, the air thick with the scent of old wood and something faintly metallic. Emma's pulse pounded in her ears as she glanced toward the elevator, its brass doors reflecting the dim light. For a moment, she swore she saw a shadow shift behind her, tall, gaunt, watching. But when she spun around, the lobby was empty. The letter crumpled in her tightening grip. Whoever sent it knew her secret. And they were here. Emma's fingers trembled as she inserted the master key into the lock of room 404, the metal cold against her skin. The door creaked open, releasing a plume of dust and the sour scent of mildew. The air inside was frigid, as if the room had been frozen in time. Her breath formed ghostly clouds in front of her as she stepped inside, the floorboards groaning underfoot. Once the door clicked shut behind her, the whispers began, soft, insistent, like the rustling of dead leaves. They didn't come from any one direction, but seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves, murmuring words she couldn't quite decipher. The peeling wallpaper caught her eye. At first glance it was just an old floral pattern, but as she moved closer, she noticed the edges curling away to reveal something beneath. Emma reached out, her nails scraping against the brittle paper, and peeled back a larger section. Beneath it, scrawled in what looked like dried blood, were the words "Forgive me." Her stomach twisted. Further down, another message, "She knows." The whispers grew louder, more urgent, as if the room itself was trying to speak to her. A sudden draft made her shiver, and she turned toward the window, locked and covered in grime. That's when she saw it, a shadow in the corridor, just beyond the door's peephole. Tall, motionless, watching. The guest, her pulse throttled in her throat as she backed away, her shoulder bumping against the wall. The whispers erupted into a cacophony, voices overlapping, pleading, accusing. Then silence. The shadow was gone. Emma gasped for air, her heart pounding. She staggered toward the door, desperate to escape, but as she reached for the handle, the light flickered, once, twice, and went out. In the darkness, the whispers returned, this time clear as day. "You shouldn't have come here." Emma's hands trembled as she stared at the old man standing before the reception desk. His sunken eyes bored into hers, and his voice was little more than a whisper as he slid the key to room 404 across the counter. "I believe you've been expecting me," he said, his lips curling into a faint, unsettling smile. Emma's breath caught in her throat. His words matched the eerie tone of the letter she'd received. Before she could respond, he turned and shuffled toward the elevator, leaving behind a trail of stale, cold air. That night, Emma couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She paced her small apartment, replaying the man's cryptic words. What did he know, and why room 44? The next morning, she arrived at the hotel early, determined to confront him. But when she knocked on the door of room 404, there was no answer. The door swung open on its own, revealing an empty room, no luggage, no sign of the old man. Only a weathered leather diary sat on the bedside table, its pages filled with meticulous entries. Her pulse raced as she flipped through the diary. Every page detailed her movements, her shifts at the hotel, her walks home, even the nights she lay awake, haunted by guilt. The entries grew more frantic, culminating in a final sentence scrawled in jagged letters. "You're next." Emma dropped the diary, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She spun around, expecting to see the old man standing there, but the room was empty. The air grew colder, and the faint sound of whispering filled her ears. She fled, but as she reached the corridor, she swore she saw a shadowy figure standing at the far end, watching her with hollow eyes. The guest was gone, but his presence lingered. And Emma knew, with chilling certainty, that he wasn't finished with her yet. Emma's days at the hotel blurred into a waking nightmare. It started with small things. A pen rolling off the desk when no one was near, the faint tick of a clock in an empty hallway. Then came the whispers. At first, they were hardly audible, like distant radio static, but soon they swelled into hushed voices murmuring her name. "Emma, Emma," the syllables dripped with malice, slithering from the walls of room 404 whenever she passed. One evening, as she sorted keys at the front desk, a gust of icy air rushed down the hallway, though all the windows were shut. The whispers crescendoed, forming words you can't hide. Emma spun around, expecting to see someone, but the lobby was empty, except for David, who stood frozen by the elevator, his expression unreadable. When she confronted him, he shrugged it off. "You're just tired," he said, but his eyes flickered toward room 404, lingering too long. That night, Emma awoke to the sound of her dresser drawers slamming shut one by one. Her reflection in the mirror grinned at her, a grotesque, stretched version of her own face. Before the glass cracked like spiderwebs, she fled to the hallway, only to find David standing outside room 404, whispering to something inside. He turned, eyes wide with guilt, and hurried away. The door creaked open a sliver, releasing a breath of decay. Emma knew then whatever lurked in that room wasn't just watching her. It was waiting. Emma's hands trembled as she flipped through the brittle pages of the old newspaper archives in the hotel's storage room. The headline screamed at her as Emadia Suidat Gerand Harbo Hatiel. The article detailed how 40 years ago, a man had brutally stabbed his wife in room 404 before turning the knife on himself. The crime scene photos were blurred, but the descriptions alone made her stomach churn. The victims, Lillian and Thomas Mercer, were a young couple, their faces hauntingly familiar. Emma's breath caught in her throat when she realized they looked exactly like her and David. The guest's diary lay open on the desk, its pages filled with meticulous observations of her daily routine, her fears, her secrets. But the final entry was what froze her blood. "I've waited so long for you, Emma. History repeats itself. You and David are just like them. You'll join me soon." The handwriting matched the letter she'd received, but the dates in the diary stretched back years. Long before she'd even worked at the hotel. How was that possible? A sudden draft blew through the room, extinguishing the lamp. In the darkness, Emma heard it. The whisper of fabric against the floor, the faintest sigh of breath behind her. She spun around, but the room was empty. Then the mirror above the desk fogged over, and 3 words appeared, scrawled as if by an unseen finger, "You're almost home," and Emma's legs gave way. The pieces clicked into place. The guest wasn't just a spectre. He was the killer, Thomas Mercer, and he'd been watching her, waiting to pull her into his twisted reenactment. And now David was part of it too. She had to find him, before it was too late. Emma's hands trembled as she backed away from David, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The dim hallway lights flickered, casting jagged shadows across his face. His eyes, once warm and familiar, now gleamed with a malice she had never seen before. "You brought this on yourself," he hissed, his voice dripping with venom. "You thought you could just forget what you did. The guest doesn't forget." Her mind raced, fragments of her past flashing before her. The accident, the lies, the blood on her hands. David had known all along. He had been waiting, plotting, feeding the darkness that now clung to the walls of the hotel. The air grew thick, the temperature plummeting as a figure materialized behind David, its form shifting like smoke. The guest. Its hollow eyes locked onto Emma, and a skeletal hand reached out, fingers curling around David's shoulder. David's smirk faltered as the shadows coiled around him, his body jerking violently. "No, wait! I helped you!" he screamed, but the guest's grip tightened, pulling him into the darkness. His cries were cut short as he vanished, swallowed whole by the abyss. Emma turned and ran, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. The hallway stretched endlessly before her, the exit just out of reach. She slammed into the lobby doors, her palms pressing against the cold wood, but they wouldn't budge. The locks clicked shut on their own, the sound final and mocking. Behind her, the whispers returned, louder now, a chorus of voices chanting her name. The guest's presence loomed, its breath icy against her neck. There was nowhere left to run. The hotel had claimed her just as it had claimed so many before. The cycle was complete. Emma opened her eyes to darkness so thick it felt like a physical weight pressing against her chest. The air was frigid, and the faintest hint of stale perfume clung to it. Something floral, decayed. She tried to sit up, but her limbs were leaden, as if she'd been submerged in tar. The bed beneath her was stiff, the sheets rough against her skin. Panic set in as she realized she wasn't in her own room. The walls began to whisper. At first, it was just a murmur, a chorus of voices overlapping in a language she couldn't understand. Then, her name rose above the others. Emma, 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 each repetition sending a jolt of terror through her. She clutched at her ears, but the whispers only grew louder, more insistent, as if they were coming from inside her own skull. A sliver of light seeped beneath the door, illuminating just enough of the room for her to recognize the peeling wallpaper, the scrawled messages she'd uncovered before. Room 404. She scrambled backward, her breath ragged, but the headboard stopped her retreat. Cold fingers brushed her shoulder. She screamed, twisting around, but there was nothing there, only the emptiness of the room. Then, the voice came, echoing from every corner, "You belong here now." Her reflection in the dusty mirror across the room moved independently, smiling at her with a knowing cruelty. Emma's stomach dropped. This wasn't a hallucination. This was her reality now. The cycle was complete. Downstairs, a new receptionist, a young man with tired eyes, picked up an envelope left at the front desk. It bore no postmark, only room 44 written in jagged script. His hands trembled as he opened it, revealing a single line, "I know what you did." The neon sign flickered weakly above the entrance of the Blackwood Hotel, its buzzing the only welcome as the traveler pushed through the heavy, creaking doors. The lobby was a graveyard of faded opulence, threadbare carpets, peeling wallpaper, and a chandelier caked in dust. The receptionist, a gaunt man with hollow eyes, barely glanced up from his ledger. "Name," he muttered, as if the act of speaking pained him. The traveler gave their name, shivering despite the stale, heavy air. The receptionist's fingers hovered over the keys before landing on room 404. A muscle in his jaw twitched. "4th floor," he said, sliding the key across the desk. His voice dropped. "Try not to linger in the halls." The elevator groaned its way upward, the dim light inside casting long, shifting shadows. By the time the doors opened, the traveler's skin prickled with unease. The hallway stretched endlessly, the carpet muffling footsteps, almost as if it were swallowing sound whole. Room 404 waited at the end, the number hanging crooked on the door. Inside, the air smelled of damp and something older, something decayed beneath the facade of mothballed linens and ancient wood. The traveler dropped their bag onto the bed, the springs shrieking in protest. Then, just as they sank into the musty armchair, the whispers began. Not from the hallway, not from a distant room, but from the walls themselves, hushed, frantic, overlapping. The traveler held their breath. The voices weren't speaking, not exactly. They were pleading. A draft slithered through the room, though the window was shut tight. The lamp flickered. The whispers grew louder, coalescing into a single, trembling word stay. The traveler stirred in their sleep, awakened by a soft scraping sound from the hallway. The room was dark, the only light a faint glow from the cracked window where the moon peeked through tattered curtains. They sat up, rubbing their eyes, and noticed a sliver of white slipping beneath the door. A note. Heart pounding, they swung their legs over the edge of the bed and picked it up. The paper was yellowed and brittle, as if it had been hidden away for years. The script was jagged, the symbols unfamiliar. Neither letters nor any language they recognized. A prank, they thought, tossing it onto the nightstand. But sleep wouldn't come. The air in the room grew heavy, the shadows stretching unnaturally long. Just as they closed their eyes, a faint, sickly green glow flickered in the darkness. The note, the symbols pulsed, shifting like writhing insects under their gaze. A cold whisper brushed against their ear, words they couldn't understand but felt in their bones. A warning, a plea. They reached out to crumple the paper, but it disintegrated to dust between their fingers. The glow lingered for a moment before fading, leaving behind the acrid smell of burnt hair and something older, like damp earth. The whispers didn't stop. They seeped from the walls, just beyond comprehension, as if the room itself was trying to speak. The traveler turned on every light, but the darkness clung to the corners, thick and watchful. Something had been awakened, and it wanted to be heard. The traveler jolted awake, their throat dry and their pulse racing. The room was different, utterly transformed from the way they'd left it. The armchair that had been by the window now stood opposite the bed, and the desk was pushed against the far wall, as though someone had rearranged the furniture in their sleep. A cold prickle crept up their spine as their gaze landed on the shadowy figure seated in the corner. Motionless, it slouched in the chair, its face obscured by darkness. The air thickened, pressing down on their chest like a weight. The traveler opened their mouth to call out, but no sound came. Then, the figure tilted its head, and the dim light from the street lamp outside flickered across its hollow, sunken eyes. A scream tore from the traveler's throat, raw and instinctive. In an instant, the figure dissolved, melting into the shadows as though it had never been there. Gasping, they scrambled to turn on the lamp, their fingers trembling. The light revealed nothing. No figure, no disturbance, except for the faint sound of shifting fabric, like a whisper of movement just beyond sight. Then, their breath caught. On the mirror above the dresser, a message had been scrawled in jagged, hurried strokes, as if written by something clawing at the glasses she remembers. The words gleamed wetly, like fresh ink, though the traveler hadn't touched the mirror. Their reflection stared back at them, pale and shaken. But then, for the briefest moment, their lips twitched into a smile they hadn't made. A whimper escaped them as they stumbled back, tripping over the displaced furniture. The whispering in the walls grew louder, murmuring secrets just beyond comprehension. The room felt smaller now, the air heavier, as though something unseen watched from the corners, waiting for them to listen. The traveler's unease grew unbearable. Determined to uncover the truth behind the whispers and the eerie messages, they spent hours in the dim glow of their laptop, scouring old newspapers and archived police reports. The search led them to a decades-old crime that sent a shiver down their spine. Room 404 had been the scene of a brutal murder. The victim, a woman named Eliza Voss, had been a guest at the hotel in the winter of 1978. According to the reports, she had been found slumped against the far wall, her throat slit, her fingers clutching a torn piece of paper. The most unsettling detail was the coroner's note. Elise had been whispering incoherently in her final moments, her lips forming words that no one could understand. The case had gone cold, the killer never identified. Digging deeper, the traveler uncovered faded tabloid articles speculating about Eliza's past. She had been a reclusive writer, obsessed with folklore and the occult. Locals claimed she had been researching something dark, something tied to the hotel itself. One article even mentioned rumors of her journals, filled with cryptic symbols and disturbing drawings, though they had vanished after her death. As the traveler closed their laptop, the room seemed to grow colder. The whispers in the walls grew louder, forming a single, ghastly sigh. Eliza. A draft slithered under the door, carrying with it the faint scent of old paper and metallic decay. The traveler's reflection in the mirror flickered, and for a moment, they saw a pale face behind their own. A woman with hollow eyes and lips parted as if still whispering her secrets. The past was no longer buried. It was alive in room 404, and it was speaking to them. The traveler jolted awake in the middle of the night, their throat raw as if they'd been screaming. But the sound that had pulled them from sleep wasn't their own. It was a voice, low and trembling, spilling from their lips. Words they didn't recognize, sentences they didn't form. The voice was feminine, desperate, repeating the same phrase over and over like a broken record. If he promised me the stars, but he only gave me the dark. Trembling, they stumbled to the bathroom, flicking on the light. The face in the mirror was theirs, but it wasn't. Their reflection moved a second too late, their smile twisting into something unnatural before their own lips had even twitched. A cold laugh echoed in the room, though their mouth hadn't opened. Then came the memories, flashes of a life not their own. A woman in a faded blue dress, her hands clutching a pendant as she backed into a corner, the glint of a knife. A man's voice, smooth as oil, whispering lies, the pain, the terror, the betrayal. The traveler gasped, doubling over as Eliza's final moments seared into their mind like a brand. When they looked up again, the mirror was fogged, but not from steam. Words had been carved into the glass, as if by an invisible finger. "You will tell them what he did to me." Their reflection mouthed the words before they did, and then their body moved on its own. Their hands scrabbled for a pen, for paper, writing in frantic, jagged strokes. Names, dates, a confession in a language they shouldn't have known. The last thing they heard before blacking out was Eliza's voice, now inside their skull, whispering, "Don't let him forget." When they woke, the pages were filled, and their reflection still wasn't theirs. The air in room 404 grew thick with tension as the traveler sat frozen, their breath shallow. Eliza's voice, now a constant presence in their mind, whispered urgently, repeating the same phrase over and over, "Find the truth." The words slithered through their thoughts like a serpent, impossible to ignore. That night, as the traveler attempted to sleep, the whispers crescendoed into a desperate plea. The walls themselves seemed to vibrate with Eliza's anguish, and the message on the mirror, "He still walks among them," glowed eerily in the darkness. Driven by a force they couldn't resist, the traveler began searching the room with frantic precision. Beneath the loose floorboard near the bed, they discovered a small, leather-bound diary, its pages yellowed with age. The entries were penned in a delicate hand, detailing Eliza's final days. She had been a guest at the hotel decades ago, lured into trust by a charming staff member who had promised her safety. The last entry was a frantic scrawl, "He's coming for me tonight. I heard the key in the lock. God help me." The traveler's hands trembled as they turned the final page, revealing a faded photograph tucked into the spine. It showed a group of hotel staff standing in the lobby, and one face stood out, a man with cold, empty eyes, now aged but unmistakable. The current night manager. Eliza's whispers crescendoed into a scream inside their mind. Him. It was him. The realization struck like icy water. The killer had never left. He was still here, watching, waiting. And now Eliza's spirit would not rest until justice was served. The traveler's reflection in the mirror suddenly twisted into a grimace, mouth moving without their control. "Bring him to me," their own voice hissed in Eliza's tone. The room darkened, the walls pressing closer. The final warning had been given. There was no turning back now. The traveler's heart pounded as they stood face to face with the elderly janitor, his eyes widening in recognition. The diary's revelations burned in their mind. This man, now frail with age, had once been the one to silence Eliza forever. The air grew thick, the walls humming with a low, guttural vibration. Before the traveler could speak, the lights flickered violently, and the temperature plummeted. The janitor's face twisted in terror as his feet lifted off the ground, his body suspended by an unseen force. His mouth opened in a silent scream as the wallpaper behind him rippled like liquid, tendrils of shadow lashing out to coil around his limbs. The traveler stumbled back, their breath coming in ragged gasps, as the walls seemed to breathe, swallowing the janitor whole. His muffled cries were cut short as the plaster sealed shut behind him, leaving no trace, save for a single, bloody handprint that seeped through the wallpaper before fading into nothing. The room fell eerily still, the only sound the traveler's frantic heartbeat. Then, a whisper. Eliza's voice, now clear and triumphant, hissed from every corner. "Justice." They fled, barely remembering to snatch their bag as they sprinted past the vacant front desk and into the storm-lashed night. The taxi ride home was a blur, their mind replaying the horrors in fragments. But as they collapsed onto their own bed, exhaustion dragging them into a fitful sleep, the whispers began again. Faint at first, then growing louder. The walls of their apartment pulsed faintly in the dark, and in the mirror across the room, a shadow moved on its own. Eliza's face flickered in the glass, her hollow eyes locking onto theirs. Room 404 had not let them go. It never would. Emily's fingers trembled as she picked up the note from the floor of her small apartment. The paper cold to the touch despite the warmth of the room. The handwriting was jagged as if scribbled in haste or fear. "Did you hear me scream last night?" The words sent a chill down her spine. She turned the note over, searching for any clue, but there was nothing else, just those 6 unsettling words, "Room 44." The number alone was enough to make her stomach twist. The hotel had sealed it off years ago after a series of unexplained incidents. Guests reporting nightmares, whispers in the dead of night, and one tragic disappearance that had never been solved. The management had quietly retired the room, pretending it didn't exist. But now, someone, or something, was claiming to be there. Emily glanced at the clock. 3:17 a.m. The hallway outside her door was silent, no footsteps retreating, no sign of whoever had delivered the message. She peered through the peephole, but the dim corridor was empty. A part of her wanted to dismiss it as a prank, but the weight in her chest told her otherwise. The note felt wrong. The air in her apartment had grown heavier, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. She thought about calling Tom, the night manager, but hesitated. What would she even say? That a ghost had slipped her a note. He'd think she was losing it. Still, the words on the paper gnawed at her. Did you hear me scream? Had she heard anything last night? She'd worked late, fallen into bed exhausted. But now, straining her memory, she recalled a sound, distant, muffled. A wail that had seeped into her dreams, dismissed as her imagination. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, making her jump. A notification from the hotel's security system, motion detected in the West Wing. Where room 404 was, the feed showed nothing but an empty hallway, yet the alert insisted something had moved. Emily's breath hitched. She wasn't imagining this. Something was reaching out to her, and it wasn't done yet. Emily clutched the note in her trembling hands as she hurried to the front desk, where Tom was flipping through a stack of paperwork. His bored expression shifted to concern when he saw her pallid face. You look like you've seen a ghost, he joked, but the humor died in his throat when she handed him the note. His fingers brushed against the paper, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The words, "Did you hear me scream last night?" were jagged, as if written in a frenzy. Room 404, Tom muttered, shaking his head. That's impossible. That room's been locked up for years. No one stayed there since. He trailed off, but Emily knew what he meant. The disappearances, the suicides, the whispers among the staff about the cursed room. She watched as he pulled out the guest ledger, flipping through the pages with growing urgency. His frown deepened. Nothing. No check-ins, no reservations. Emily swallowed hard. Then who wrote this? A sudden flicker of the overhead lights made them both jump. The air grew heavy, as if the very atmosphere was pressing down on them. And then, a scream. High-pitched, raw with terror, coming from the direction of room 404. Emily's blood turned to ice. Tom was already moving, striding down the hallway with purpose, but the security feed on the monitor showed nothing. No figure, no movement. Just the empty, dimly lit corridor. You heard that, right? Emily whispered. Tom's jaw tightened. Yeah, I heard it. They stood in silence, the weight of the moment settling over them. Then, with forced casualness, Tom shut the ledger. Probably just pipes. Or some prankster. But his voice lacked conviction. Emily glanced back toward the hallway, her skin prickling. The scream had been real. And the note, someone had left it. Someone who knew about room 404, or something that remembered it. Emily's fingers trembled as she reached for the handle of room 404, her breath shallow. The hallway was silent, the dim overhead light flickering as if warning her to turn back. Yet, the eerie note gnawed at her mind. Did you hear me scream last night? She had to know. The door creaked open with a whisper, revealing a space that defied logic. The room was immaculate, the bed neatly made, a faint scent of lavender lingering in the air, unnerving, given the years of neglect. But the cold was unbearable, a deep, unnatural chill that seeped into her bones. Her teeth chattered as she stepped inside, her eyes darting to the bedside table. There, resting atop the polished wood, was a leather-bound journal. The cover felt oddly warm beneath her touch, a stark contrast to the icy room. The pages crackled as she flipped through them, each entry more frantic than the last. The handwriting grew jagged, the ink smudged as if the writer's hand had trembled. I hear them, one passage read, every night scratching at the walls, whispering my name. Another, scribbled in hasty the mirror, it moves when I'm not looking. The final entry sent a jolt through her, they won't let me leave. The words seemed to pulse on the page, as if infused with desperation. A floorboard groaned behind her. Emily whirled around, heart hammering, but the room was empty. Then, from the closet, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails against wood. The air thickened, and she could have sworn she heard a breath, something inhaling just behind her ear. She bolted for the door, slamming it shut behind her. The moment it clicked, the hallway lights blazed back to life, the cold vanishing as if it had never been. But the journal's final words echoed in her mind, a silent scream trapped within the pages. Tom and Emily sat in the dimly lit hotel office, the glow of the computer screen casting eerie shadows across their faces. The guest ledger lay open on the desk, its yellowed pages filled with names dating back decades. Tom's skepticism had softened since the scream in the hallway, and now he scoured the archives with a grim determination. There's got to be something, he muttered, fingers flying over the keyboard. Emily, meanwhile, traced the initials, G, on the journal's cover, her stomach twisting with dread. The search led them to a newspaper clipping from 1972, brittle with age. The headline read, Mysterious Disappearance at Grand Hotel, Guest Vanishes Without a Trace. The article detailed how Alistair Grayson, a businessman staying in room 404, had reported strange occurrences, Whispers in the dead of night, shadows moving against the walls. Before he was last seen entering his room, his belongings were found untouched, the bed neatly made, as if he had never been there at all. The case was closed, dismissed as a man fleeing personal troubles. Emily's breath hitched as she compared the dates. The journal entries, they stopped the same night he disappeared. Tom leaned in, his voice low. "You think that's him? That he's the one leaving the notes?" Before she could answer, the overhead light flickered violently, plunging them into darkness for a heartbeat. When it returned, the journal had fallen open to a page they hadn't seen before. Scrawled in frantic, jagged letters was a single line, "It's not just him. There are others." A chill crawled up Emily's spine. The room suddenly felt too small, the air thick with the weight of something unseen. Tom reached for her hand, his grip tight. "We need to find out what happened in that room," he said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. Outside, the wind howled against the windows, carrying with it the faintest echo of a scream, one that sounded far too familiar. Emily jolted awake, her heart hammering against her ribs as the sound of 3 heavy knocks reverberated through her apartment. The silence that followed was somehow worse, thick and suffocating, as if the air itself was holding its breath. She sat frozen in bed, straining to hear anything beyond the frantic pulse in her ears. Then, a faint rustling. A slip of paper slid beneath her door, the sound like a whisper against the floorboards. Her hands trembled as she picked up the note. The words were scrawled in the same jagged handwriting as before, "As I can see you." The ink was smudged as though written in haste, or something far worse. Emily's breath hitched. She wasn't just being watched, she was being hunted. Fumbling for her phone, she dialed Tom, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's happening again. Someone's here." They left another note. Tom's groggy protest died as he heard the fear in her voice. "I'm coming," he said. Minutes dragged like hours until his knock came, firm, familiar. Emily yanked the door open, but the hallway was empty except for Tom. No sign of the intruder, no footprints, just the faintest echo of laughter, drifting from the shadows at the far end of the corridor. It wasn't playful, it was mocking. Tom scanned the hall, his flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. "There's no one here," he muttered, but the unease in his voice betrayed him. Emily clutched the note tighter, the paper crinkling in her grip. "Then who left this?" she whispered. The laughter came again, closer this time. A dry, rattling sound like bones scraping together. The light above them flickered once, twice, then died. In the sudden blackness, something brushed against Emily's ankle. She screamed. By the time the light sputtered back on, the hallway was silent. The note in her hand was gone. Emily's fingers trembled as she turned the handle of room 404, the icy metal biting into her skin. Tom stood close behind her, his breath shallow, his flashlight beam cutting through the dim hallway. The door creaked open, revealing the same unnervingly pristine room, bed neatly made, curtains drawn, the scent of old perfume lingering. But the air was colder now, so cold it burned her lungs. Before either of them could speak, the door slammed shut with a force that rattled the walls. Tom lunged for the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "It's locked," he muttered, twisting the knob uselessly. Emily's gaze snapped to the bedside table as the journal's pages began to flip wildly, as though caught in a storm. The book slapped shut, revealing fresh ink scrawled across a previously blank page. "You shouldn't have come." A rasping breath came from the closet, a sound like dry leaves scraping against stone. Emily's blood turned to ice. The closet door trembled, then groaned open just a crack. A voice, brittle and ancient, whispered, "Let me show you where I went." Tom stepped in front of Emily, but she could feel the presence slithering closer, the stench of damp rot filling the room. The walls pulsed as if alive, shadows stretching and twisting into grotesque shapes. Something flickered in the corner of her eye. A gaunt face, its mouth stretched in a silent scream. Then the lights flickered out, plunging them into darkness. In the blackness the whispers multiplied, echoing from every direction. Fingers, skeletal and cold, brushed against Emily's wrist. The journal hit the floor with a thud, its pages rustling as unseen hands turned them to another entry. This one written in a darker ink, nearly black. "They're coming for you too." The darkness swallowed everything, the walls, the floor, even the air itself. Emily's breath came in ragged gasps as cold fingers of dread coiled around her heart. Tom's voice trembled as he called out her name, but she couldn't see him, only feel his hand gripping hers tightly. Then came the scent of iron, thick and cloying, as crimson rivulets snake it down the walls, pooling on the floor like blood from an open wound. The room pulsed with a malevolent energy, the air humming with whispers too faint to decipher. A figure materialized from the shadows, his form translucent and weightless. Mr. Alistair's sunken face was a mask of anguish, his mouth twisted in a silent scream. His hollow eyes locked onto Emily's. "You have to leave," he pleaded, his voice a brittle echo. "Before it's too late." Emily's throat tightened. "What is this place?" she managed to whisper. The ghost's hands shook as he gestured to the walls. A prison, he said. One that feeds on the lost. The room shuddered violently, the floor tilting beneath them. Tom pulled Emily toward the door, but it wouldn't budge, as if sealed by an unseen force. The journal on the bedside table flew open, its pages fluttering wildly until it settled on a fresh, ink-stained entry. "You shouldn't have come." The words dripped like tears. Then, from the depths of the closet, a rasping voice slithered through the air, chilling Emily to the bone. "Let me show you where I went." The last thing Emily saw before the darkness consumed everything was Mr. Alistair's outstretched hand, his spectral fingers brushing her cheek in a final, desperate warning. When dawn spilled through the grimy window of 404, the room was silent. The walls were dry, the journal closed. The door creaked open as if nothing had happened. But Emily and Tom were gone, their absence swallowed whole by the hotel's cursed memory. Hours later, a new note materialized at the reception desk. The letters jagged and hurried. "They heard me scream." The words hung in the air like a lament, an echo of all those lost to the unspeakable hunger of room 404.